18, and those sensitive to frightening or disturbing material. If you are under 18 or easily affected by horror and psychological terror, please do not watch. The stories you are about to hear are real accounts shared by real people, and they will stay with you long after this video ends. The kindness that saved a life. What if the one thing standing between you and death was simply being a good person? I need you to stop whatever you're doing right now. Put down your phone, close the other tabs, because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that doesn't just make your skin crawl. It rewires how you see the world. It rewires how you see people. This story was told to me by a woman named Carol. Carol was a close friend of my family, practically an aunt to me growing up. She told me this story more times than I can count, always in that quiet, deliberate way people tell stories that genuinely changed them. I never got tired of hearing it. Honestly, I don't think I could forget it even if I tried. Every single time hitchhiking comes up in conversation, on the news, in a movie, driving past someone on the shoulder of a highway, Carol's story floods back. It makes my chest tighten. Sometimes it makes me feel physically ill. And I think once you hear it, you'll understand exactly why. Carol grew up in rural Tennessee in the early 1980s. She was in her mid-20s at the time. Warm, generous, the kind of person who genuinely believed in helping strangers. Not naively, not recklessly, just fundamentally kind in the way that some people are born. People who hear someone struggling and can't help but try to ease that weight a little. You know the type. Maybe you are that type. Carol was absolutely that type, even back then when she was young and the world felt a little more forgiving than it does today. On a bright Tuesday morning, Carol was making the long drive into the city, about 2.5 hours from the small town where she lived. She'd done this drive dozens of times. She knew every curve, every gas station, every farmhouse that blurred past her window. It was the kind of drive that puts you on autopilot, where your hands just know the road. She was about 40 minutes out of town when she saw him, a man, walking along the gravel shoulder of the highway. Not running, not stumbling, just walking with this kind of quiet determination, like he'd already accepted whatever discomfort the day was bringing him. As Carol's car drew closer, the man turned and did what people do when they're desperate and out of options. He raised his arm, extended his thumb, and looked straight at her. Carol slowed down. She told me she didn't even really think about it. That's just who she was. She pulled over, rolled down her window, and asked if he needed a ride. He was polite, soft-spoken, a little shy, actually. The kind of shy that reads as genuine rather than calculated. He asked if she was heading toward the city, and whether she could drop him anywhere along the way. Carol smiled, unlocked the passenger door, and told him to hop in. His name was Derek. He tossed a worn canvas bag into the back seat, buckled his seatbelt, and that was that. Two strangers headed down a Tennessee highway toward the same city for completely different reasons. Here's what Carol always emphasized when she told this story. The ride was pleasant, not just tolerable, not just uneventful. Genuinely, warmly pleasant. Derek was thoughtful and funny in a low-key way. They talked about music, about the cost of living, about a news story that had been dominating the radio that week. He asked about her family. She asked about where he was headed. The miles slipped by without the usual awkward tension that comes with sharing a small space with someone you don't know. About halfway through the drive, Carol pulled into a diner off the exit ramp, a truck stop kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and the best pie in 3 counties, she always said. She'd stopped here 100 times. She figured they could both use a break and a hot meal. Derek got quiet when she told him lunch was on her. He looked uncomfortable in that specific way people look when they've got too much pride and not enough money, and they're trying to figure out which one to let win. Carol told him it was no big deal. He eventually nodded and said thank you, and they slid into a booth by the window and ordered. Over lunch, Derek opened up a little more. Money was tight. Had been for a while. He didn't have a car. Hitchhiking wasn't something he'd done often, but sometimes circumstances don't leave you many alternatives. Carol listened. She didn't pity him or lecture him. She just listened, the way she always listened, like what you were saying actually mattered. They got back on the road. The last hour of the drive passed easily. By the time they hit the city limits, Carol told me she genuinely felt like she'd made a new friend. Downtown, she pulled over at a corner, Derek pointed out. He got out, grabbed his bag from the back seat, and thanked her. Not just a quick thank you bye, a real one. He stood at the window and told her she had no idea how much this meant to him. Then he asked, a little sheepishly, if she'd be willing to give him her number. Not in a weird way, he clarified quickly, just so he could maybe check in someday. Return the favor somehow. Carol thought that was sweet. She wrote her number on a gas station receipt and handed it over. She drove away, smiling. That warm feeling of having done something genuinely good for another human being carried her through the rest of the day. She told me about it that night when she called her sister. Her sister told her she was too trusting. Carol laughed it off. 7 days later, her phone rang. She almost didn't recognize his voice at first. It was Derek, but something about his tone was different. Stripped down, quieter than she remembered. He didn't say hello the way normal people say hello. He just started talking, fast, urgent, like he'd been rehearsing this and needed to get it out before his nerve broke. He told her to thank God she was raised the way she was. Carol started to respond, and he kept going. He told her that when he'd gotten into her car that Tuesday morning, he hadn't been planning on making it to the city. Not the way Carol was. He had a different plan. He told her that the diner, the halfway point, the cracked vinyl booths, the best pie in 3 counties, had been chosen in advance. He'd picked it out in his head before she'd even stopped to offer him the ride. He was going to attack her there, steal her car, leave her in the ditch behind the parking lot, and drive west and never look back. Carol didn't speak. She told me later that she felt the floor of her kitchen tilt under her feet. Derek kept going. He told her that something happened at that diner that he hadn't accounted for. She'd bought him lunch without hesitation. She'd listened to him like he was a real person. She'd smiled at him like he wasn't a burden or a threat or a mistake. And something in him, some part that he thought had gone dark a long time ago, wouldn't let him go through with it. He sat across from her in that booth and realized he couldn't do it. Not to her, not to this person. He said, "Please, Carol, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you will never pick up another hitchhiker as long as you live." And then he hung up. She tried calling the number back. It rang to a payphone somewhere off a highway she'd never driven. Nobody answered. She never heard from Derek again. Carol told me this story for the first time when I was 9 years old. I didn't fully understand it then. I thought it was about hitchhiking being dangerous, and sure, that's part of it. But the older I get, the more I think the real story is about something harder to name, about how close the world comes to catastrophe every single day, and how sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes, a small act of genuine human kindness is the only thing standing in the way. Carol never picked up another hitchhiker. Neither have I. And now that you've heard this story, I have a feeling you'll think twice, too. But hold on. Because Carol's story? That's just the beginning. What comes next is darker, more immediate. And it didn't end with a phone call. The man with the knife. Some decisions take a fraction of a second. The consequences last a lifetime. It was a Saturday night in late October, the kind of night where the air has that sharp metallic edge that makes everything feel slightly more dangerous than it actually is. Or maybe exactly as dangerous as it actually is, and the cold is just honest about it. James was 23 years old and driving home along Route 9 in upstate New York. It was a road he knew well, a long, straight stretch of asphalt cutting through dense woodland with maybe a half-dozen houses scattered across 10 miles, the kind of road where you can go 10 minutes without seeing another set of headlights, the kind of road that feels fine during the day and feels completely different at 1 in the morning. James had his high beams on. He always did on this stretch. Not because of deer, though there were plenty, but because the darkness on either side of that road was the kind of thick, total darkness that feels like it's pressing against the windows. He spotted the figure from almost a quarter-mile away. Just a shape at first. A pale smear at the edge of the headlight beam. As James got closer, the shape resolved into a person. A young man, it looked like, standing very still at the shoulder of the road. Not walking, just standing, facing the oncoming traffic, one arm raised. James's heartbeat picked up. He told himself to keep driving. Every rational part of his brain was composing a list of reasons to press the gas and leave. That figure in his rearview mirror. It was after midnight. It was a deserted road. There was no reason a person would be standing out here in the October cold unless something had gone very wrong. And when things go very wrong for people, sometimes they take that wrongness out on whoever is nearby. But James slowed down. He told me he doesn't fully understand why, even now. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the image of being stranded himself on a road like this. Whatever it was, his foot eased off the gas, then found the brake, and before his better judgment could override the decision, he was stopped on the shoulder with his window rolling down. The young man approached. He was maybe 25, James estimated. Gray hoodie with the hood pulled up despite the fact that the wind had died down. Dark jeans. A build that was somewhere between lean and gaunt, like someone who hadn't been eating well for a while. He didn't smile. He didn't look relieved the way people look when someone stops to help them. He just looked at James with an expression that was very, very flat. "Where you headed?" James asked. "Just up the road," the man said. His voice was low, deliberate, the kind of voice that doesn't waste words. "Hop in," James said. He regretted it before the door even closed. The passenger door on James's SUV had a stiff latch. It always had. You had to really pull it shut. The man tried once and it didn't catch. James told him to open it back up and give it a hard slam. Simple enough. People who'd ridden with James before knew the drill, always got a laugh out of it. The man didn't laugh. He turned and looked at James. Then he turned and looked straight ahead through the windshield. Then he waited. 3 full seconds, James counted, before he opened the door and slammed it shut. James put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. The speedometer climbed to 60, then 70. The speed limit was 55, but James wasn't interested in following the speed limit. He was interested in getting this man out of his car as fast as physically possible. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't the comfortable silence of two people who don't need to fill space. It was the other kind, pressurized, charged, the kind where you become acutely aware of your own breathing and the way the person next to you is holding themselves. James reached for the radio dial. Something in his gut told him to leave it alone. He listened to that gut feeling. From the corner of his eye, James noticed the man had turned his head and was looking at him. Not glancing, looking. the sustained, unblinking kind of attention that normal people don't direct at strangers in moving vehicles. James stared at the road. He could feel that gaze like pressure against the side of his face. A full mile passed. James counted telephone poles to keep his breathing steady. Then the man spoke. "You know," he said in that same low, flat voice, "I've been thinking for a while now about whether it's worth it to keep going." James glanced over, not sure what he'd just heard. The man reached into the front pocket of his hoodie. What he pulled out was a folding knife, large. The blade was still closed, but the handle was red, bright red, the kind of color you'd use for something you wanted to be able to find in the dark. The man held it loosely in his lap and looked down at it. "Been carrying this for a few weeks," he said, "waiting for the right moment." James felt his organs rearrange themselves. That's the only way he could describe it afterward, like everything inside him dropped 6 inches at once. "Put that away," James said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "Right now, put it away." The man ignored him. He looked up from the knife, looked at the road ahead, and said in that same flat, emotionless tone, "Pull over next to that sign." There was a speed limit sign coming up on the right. James didn't want to stop. Every instinct he had screamed at him to floor it, to drive until he hit a gas station or a police cruiser or civilization of any kind. But the knife was right there, the man was right there, and the road was empty in both directions. James pulled over. What happened next is something he described to me very carefully because he said he needed to be precise about it. He needed people to understand exactly what occurred and in what order, because the order mattered. The man opened his door, stepped out, and walked to the front of the vehicle, staying in the beam of the headlights. Then he turned back to James and said calmly, "Get out. There's something behind that sign I want to show you." James didn't get out. "Come on," the man said, still calm, still flat. "Just for a second. Behind the sign." James looked at the man standing in his headlights. He looked at the open passenger door. He looked at the tree line beyond the sign, black, total, impenetrable. And he made a decision. "Yeah, okay," James said. "Give me 1 second." He opened his door. He stepped out slowly, hands visible, moving like someone who was complying. The man watched him come around the front of the vehicle. James kept his eyes on the man's hands, knife still in his right hand, loose at his side. James took 3 steps toward the sign. Then the man shifted his weight to follow, and for exactly 1 second he was directly behind the rear bumper of the SUV with his line of sight to the driver's door partially broken. James spun, lunged back into the driver's seat, yanked the door shut, jammed the transmission into drive, and accelerated down the road. He didn't look in the mirror, not once. He drove at 90 miles an hour for 4 straight miles until he hit a gas station with lights and a teenager behind the counter and a security camera above the door, and he sat in that parking lot for 15 minutes with his hands shaking against the steering wheel. He called the police. He gave them the location, the description, the knife color. He doesn't know if they found the man. He never got a follow-up call. Maybe the man was gone by the time anyone got there. Maybe he walked back into those woods and became part of that darkness. James still drives Route 9, but he told me he keeps his windows up now, no matter the weather, and he doesn't slow down for anyone standing on the shoulder. Not ever. The wrong truck. There's a specific kind of drunk teenager logic that only makes sense at 2 in the morning when you're 17, 6 miles from home, and you've lost your ride. Ryan was 16, 3 months past his birthday, proud owner of a used silver Honda Civic that his dad had helped him find at a dealership in Roanoke, Virginia. It was the summer of 2005, and a friend named Tyler had invited him to a party at a house about 6 miles down the highway from where Ryan's family lived. Ryan knew the road. He'd ridden his bike on it as a kid. It was one of those long, rural, 2-lane highways that Virginia does so well. Trees on both sides, the occasional farmhouse set back from the road, no streetlights, no sidewalks. The kind of road that's beautiful in daylight and completely different after dark. Since Ryan planned on drinking at the party, he'd arranged a carpool with Tyler and Tyler's girlfriend, Madison. They lived in the same direction, it made sense, and Madison had agreed to stay sober. Simple plan. The party was at a kid named Brandon's place, a guy Ryan knew from school, not well, but enough to get an invite. Brandon's house sat right on that highway, and because his nearest neighbors were half a mile away and his parents were in Myrtle Beach for the weekend, the party had expanded far beyond what anyone planned. There were cars parked in the field beside the house. Someone had set up speakers outside. The night was warm, and everything felt easy in that specific summer way. Ryan stayed for hours. At some point, he estimates around midnight, Tyler found him near the bonfire and told him Madison had to leave early. Family thing. Couldn't be helped. Tyler said he'd find them a ride home. Ryan said okay and didn't think much of it. By 1:30 in the morning, Ryan was having trouble keeping track of the conversation he was in. He'd had more drinks than he'd planned. He started looking for Tyler. Tyler was gone. Not gone. Ryan held on to the hope that he was just inside somewhere or had wandered off with someone and would reappear. But as Ryan moved through the thinning crowd, checking the porch, the yard, the driveway, it became increasingly clear that Tyler had gotten himself a ride and left without mentioning it to anyone. Ryan borrowed someone's phone and tried Tyler's home number. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. He looked at the phone in his hand and realized he didn't have any other numbers memorized. Everything was in his own phone, which was at home because he'd forgotten to charge it. The party was winding down. People Ryan didn't know were leaving in cars he didn't recognize. He stood in Brandon's driveway and tried to think clearly, which was difficult given the circumstances. The walk home was 6 miles. In his current state, Ryan estimated it would take him somewhere between an hour and forever. It was warm, the road was familiar, and he didn't see another option. He started walking. He followed the highway, staying on the left shoulder, facing traffic, the way his parents had always told him. The road was quiet. A few cars passed, going the other direction. The tree line on either side was black and still. He walked past the mailboxes and fence posts and driveways he'd passed 1,000 times, and after about 15 minutes he felt okay about it. Sober enough to walk, warm enough to be comfortable, close enough to home that the math felt manageable. Then he saw the headlights. They came up from behind him, 2 white beams sweeping the road. Ryan's heart lifted. He turned, raised his arm, stuck out his thumb. The vehicle, a large pickup truck, late model, dark blue, slowed and pulled over beside him. The driver's window came down. The man inside was maybe 50, heavy-set, with a short beard and a trucker hat. He looked at Ryan the way adults at that age look at teenagers out past midnight, somewhere between concern and amusement. "Where you headed, son?" Ryan told him his house was just down the road, probably slurring more than he realized. The man chuckled, told him to get in, and Ryan, relieved, exhausted, grateful, climbed into the passenger seat. He tried to make conversation. He asked the man's name, said something about the party, tried to piece together the social niceties he'd been taught. But the warmth of the truck cab and the hum of the engine and the steady darkness scrolling past the windows did what they were going to do, regardless of Ryan's intentions, and somewhere on that dark stretch of highway, he fell asleep. He woke up to the truck still moving. That was the first wrong thing. The drive from Brandon's to his house took maybe 8 minutes, even at a relaxed speed. Ryan looked at the dashboard clock. He'd been in this truck for considerably longer than 8 minutes. He looked out the window. Nothing was familiar. "Where are we?" Ryan asked. His voice came out higher than he intended. The driver didn't answer right away. Then, "What were you doing out so late anyway?" Ryan's brain, still slow with alcohol and sleep, processed this for a moment. He'd asked a direct question. The man had responded with an entirely different question, the kind of non-answer that, in the cold light of sobriety, is a very specific kind of answer. "Can you let me out?" Ryan said. "Anywhere is fine. I can figure it out." "No," the man said. "Just that. One word. Delivered without hesitation, without explanation, without any of the softening people use when they decline a reasonable request. A flat, firm, final no." Ryan felt the alcohol leave his body in one cold rush. He felt completely, brutally sober in the way you get when adrenaline decides it's done waiting. He needed to get out of this truck. His mind ran through options. The door. He glanced at it. They were moving fast on a dark road. Jumping wasn't survivable. His phone was at home. He had no idea where he was. He was in an enclosed space with a man twice his size who had just refused to let him out. And then his stomach lurched. Not a metaphor. His body, catching up to the fear, began doing what his body did when it was this stressed and this intoxicated at the same time. His mouth filled with saliva. His vision swam slightly. He pressed his hand over his mouth. The man glanced over, noticed Ryan's pallor, and leaned slightly away. Ryan made a decision. He didn't fight it. He let it happen. He turned toward the driver's side and vomited across the center console and onto the man's lap in a way that was sudden, complete, and absolutely unavoidable. The driver swore loudly, and the truck lurched to the right and came to a hard stop on the gravel shoulder. Ryan had the door open before the truck fully stopped. He hit the ground running. The tree line was about 30 feet away, and he covered the distance in the dark and crashed through the brush and dropped behind a fallen log, pressing himself flat, trying to control his breathing. The truck door opened. The man had a flashlight, a powerful one. The beam swept the tree line methodically, not frantically. That methodical quality was somehow worse than panic would have been. This was someone who was thinking clearly. Ryan pressed himself against the ground and watched the beam pass over him. Once, the light hovered, moved on. Then it came back. The man was walking deeper into the woods now, the flashlight picking through the underbrush 20, 30 feet past where Ryan was hiding. His footsteps moved away, deliberately, unhurried. Ryan got up. He ran back to the road. The truck was there, engine still running. He tried the door. Locked. He stood on the shoulder of an unfamiliar highway, in the dark, and then down the road to his left, he saw headlights. He ran to the center of the road and stood there waving both arms. The approaching car slowed, tried to move around him. He moved with it. It stopped. A middle-aged couple, a man and a woman, looked at him through the windshield with an expression somewhere between alarm and irritation. Ryan told them he needed help. He told them there was a man in the woods looking for him. He told them about the truck. The woman reached back and opened the rear door. They drove him to his house. His parents were awake before he reached the front door. His mom had been calling around. His dad listened to everything, then asked the question Ryan knew was coming. "Did you get his plate number?" Ryan hadn't. He knew the truck was dark blue, late model. He thought the first 2 letters of the plate might have been R and something. That was all he had. His dad filed a report the next morning anyway. Ryan doesn't know if anything came of it. He and Tyler didn't talk much after that summer. Some friendships have an expiration date, and some events accelerate it. Ryan told me this story 10 years after it happened, and even then he paused twice while telling it. Not because the memory had faded, but because it hadn't. He said, "The part that still messes with me isn't what happened. It's how close it was to not happening at all. If I'd been a little more awake, if I hadn't thrown up, if that couple hadn't come down that road." He paused. "A lot of things had to go right for me to be able to tell you this. What the road teaches, some lessons cost too much. Others, if you're lucky, cost you nothing but the story." I want to close this video with something I've been thinking about since I first started collecting these accounts, because I think there's a version of this conversation we don't have often enough. Not about stranger danger in the abstract, not about crime statistics, but about the specific and strange psychology of the road. There is something about being in a car that changes us. Not in a bad way, necessarily, but in a way worth understanding. A car in motion is a bubble, a sealed private world that follows its own rules. The road creates a kind of intimacy that doesn't exist in other settings. Two strangers in a moving vehicle are closer, physically and psychologically, than they'd ever allow themselves to be on a sidewalk or in a waiting room. The road strips away the usual social distances. It creates an atmosphere where people say things they wouldn't say anywhere else. Sometimes that's profound, sometimes it's dangerous, often it's both. Carol's hitchhiker sat in her car and had what might have been the most honest conversation of his adult life. He ate a meal bought by a stranger without any transactional obligation attached. He experienced in a vinyl booth off a Tennessee highway something he might not have experienced in years, the sensation of being treated like a person worth treating kindly. And that experience broke through whatever wall had gone up inside him. I'm not going to tell you that kindness always saves you. It doesn't. Carol got lucky in a way that has nothing to do with her character or her choices. She got lucky because the specific human being she happened to pick up that day had a specific threshold that her specific kindness happened to exceed. Different person, different outcome. The world doesn't reward goodness reliably, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But here's what I keep coming back to. Derek made a phone call he didn't have to make. After the fact, when he was safely away and there was nothing Carol could do to him and no consequence he'd face for staying silent, he called her. He told her the truth. He warned her. That act, that strange, unnecessary act of honesty from a man who'd been prepared to commit a serious crime, is one of the stranger and more human things I've encountered in any story I've ever heard. What does that tell us? I think it tells us that people are enormously complicated in ways that don't fit neatly into the categories we create for them. Derek was, by any reasonable standard, a dangerous man on that Tuesday morning. He had a plan. He had intent. He'd scouted the location. And then a woman bought him pie and listened to him talk and smiled at him like he mattered, and the plan collapsed. The road, in all three of these stories, is both setting and metaphor. It's the place where the rules of ordinary life thin out, where the structures that usually separate us, neighborhoods, buildings, institutions, other people nearby, are absent. Where we are, briefly, fully exposed to whoever we've chosen to share that space with. James chose to share it with a stranger on a dark October road and ended up in the most frightening 8 minutes of his life. He survived because he was calm and observant and quick, and because he had the presence of mind to wait for exactly the right moment before he moved. Ryan survived because his body, doing the least dignified thing a body can do, created a distraction at the only moment a distraction was available. He survived because a couple on a quiet road didn't drive around a teenager waving his arms in the middle of the street. He survived because of luck, and because of strangers who helped him the way Carol once helped Derek, not knowing anything about the situation, just responding to someone in need. Here's what all three of these stories have in common, beyond the obvious. Every single one of them turned on a moment. One moment where someone made a choice to stop, to speak, to act, to not act. And that choice cascaded through everything that followed. Carol's moment was when she pulled over. Derek's moment was in that diner booth. James's moment was when he said, "Yeah, okay, give me 1 second," and started walking toward the sign. Ryan's moment was when he stopped fighting his body and let it do what it needed to do. We like to think that our survival instincts are these clear, loud, unmistakable sirens. Danger. Leave now. Get out. And sometimes they are, but sometimes they're quieter than that. Sometimes they're a vague unease you can't name. A door that doesn't close right. A question answered with a different question. A voice that's too flat, too even, too empty of the small emotional fluctuations that tell us a person is present and human and reacting to us. Listen to those quiet signals. They're trying to tell you something. I'm not going to tell you to never stop for someone on the side of the road. Carol's story exists, and it's true, and it's a story about kindness mattering in ways we can't predict. But I am going to tell you this. If you stop, pay attention. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone in your car makes you feel like you need to get them out as fast as possible, you're probably right. And if you're ever the one on the side of the road needing a ride, call someone. Find a gas station. Wait in a lit place. Do anything except put yourself into a sealed private space with a stranger whose intentions you have no way to verify. The road is long, the road is dark, the road connects us in ways that nothing else does, and sometimes those connections are the best thing that's ever happened to you, and sometimes they are the very last thing that should have happened. Choose carefully. And if you're ever in doubt, just keep driving. Before we go, there's one more thing I want to say, and it might be the most important thing in this entire video. If any part of what you heard today sounded familiar, if you've had an experience on the road that frightened you, that you've never told anyone, that you've been carrying alone, you're not alone. These stories exist because people were willing to share them, because someone decided that their experience was worth more as a warning passed forward than as a secret kept inside. The road takes people. We know this, but the road also returns people, sometimes shaken, sometimes scarred, sometimes with a story that changes every person who hears it. Carol told her story to a 9-year-old because she wanted that child to live differently than she might have otherwise. It worked. I never picked up a stranger on a dark road, and now I've told her story to you. Pass it on.